ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to Evolving Consciousness. I'm your host Purushottam, and in today's video, we are going to discuss about a topic which probably the entire human race is chasing after. If you ask any individual or a group of individual, what do you want in life, or in heavy terminology, what do you think is the purpose of your life, or what is the main goal of your life? 10 people may come up with 10 different answers. One person might say that I want to be an extremely famous doctor, a medical professional, and another person might say he wants to be a movie star. Another person might say he wants to be a social worker. But one thing you'll notice that if you start questioning them further down the line, every human being will sooner or later say that he's doing what he's doing to experience this emotion, which in common day language is called happiness. Every human endeavor, whether consciously or unconsciously, is chasing this emotion called happiness, this feel good emotion. And whether someone is having a certain, whichever spectrum of consciousness a person is established in, whatever his level of understanding is, everyone wants to be happy. But why is it so difficult to be happy is a question very few ponder upon. Today's video is going to sort of give you a completely tangential overview, an overview which you haven't heard of before. When I was exposed to this concept, I found this to be extremely relieving. At the same time, made me realize the futility of human thoughts and the way we approach this emotion called happiness. And towards the end of the video, we'll talk about the top 5 ways as to how we can practice or how our consciousness can become a natural offspring of this emotion called happiness. Now, to begin with, we should understand that happiness is a state of mind. I mean, you would have heard of this definition of happiness. But what does this mean when they say happiness is a state of mind, right? Now, most of us think that when we have a certain object in our life, that object can be anything from a thing to a person to a job title to an intellectual achievement to any kind of material prosperity. It can be anything. It can mean different things for different people. And we might have this idea that once I acquire that, I'll be happy. But essentially, does that happiness last forever? Not really, right? And when we say happiness is a state of mind, does that mean that this mind which we are talking about, right, it sort of perceives that object and that situation as a good thing, and it creates that state of mind? That happiness was always there. It was a part of the self or the consciousness, but it was reflected through that object. Or in simpler terms, you can say that that object stimulated that state of being which is already there constantly, which we are not even aware of. It stimulated that, and then we experience happiness. Now, there is a phenomenal book which I recently read. It's called The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. It's a world famous book. It's an international bestseller. And there's one particular chapter in that book which talks about the path of unconditional happiness. And the basic premise and the basic philosophy of that chapter is that you don't need to qualify to be happy. No matter in what stage of life you are in, no matter what you have acquired or what you haven't acquired, you don't need any qualifications to be happy. You need not have a certain bandwidth of knowledge, resources, or hoarding of material objects to make you happy. Now, you might be thinking that this is something which is not very relatable or comprehensible. He says that the number one reason human beings avoid happiness is they think somewhere deep down within that they need to qualify for happiness. If I achieve this, I'll be happy. If I get into this particular relationship, I'll be happy. If I get into this premier institute, I'll be happy. Now, this is not saying that we shouldn't chase those things. Essentially, this is saying that we shouldn't consider those things as basic qualifications, a basic requirements. If those things happen in our life, then we'll be happy. And if they don't happen in their life, we'll be miserable. And he says something very beautiful. He says that we were not put up in this world to be miserable. We were essentially put up in this world so that we can completely capitalize our human potential, but not being miserable. But essentially, we can chase those things, whichever we want to accomplish, whatever things we want to accomplish. We need not chase those things for happiness, but essentially, we need to be happy while chasing them. And he says this aspect that the path of unconditional happiness is probably the highest practice of spirituality. You need not read hefty scriptures. You need not have any kind of association with any spiritual literature. But if you ardently discipline your mind to be in a continuous state of happiness, you will automatically go through the different stages of yoga, though you know nothing about them. Now, this was very surprising for me because I had this thought process that if a person knows something, only then can he practice that. However, there is a very fun aspect and a fun nuance to this. It's not easy to be happy 24/7. And when you try to be happy 24/7, you always struggle because the human mind oscillates. And the people who are happy 24/7 who are already always blissed out, these people are the ones who have acquired this high state of consciousness. And there was a recent study which was done by Indian Institute of Management, which sort of categorized and ranked the people who are the most happiest in the world. And it found out that the most happiest people were not the most materially successful people, but essentially they were all spiritualists. In the number one came the people from the Hare Krishna community. In the number two and the number three, they were people from the Buddhist community and the other spiritual schools of thought. Now this sort of brings us to this main focus of this unconditional happiness, right? And he says that whenever you notice yourself throughout the day drifting to something which probably your mind will always try to play fool with you. The mind will say this is not there in your life, so you probably don't qualify to feel happy. The mind is trying to fool you to believe that unless this thing happens in your life, till that time you are not supposed to be happy. And this is a foolish thing to condition ourselves or to function. He says, he gives a very funny example. Suppose your wife leaves you, or your husband dies, or you lose your job, or anything can happen. Billion things can happen from now to the rest of your life. Are we going to make our state of happiness a slave to the outside situations? Because that is like a slave kind of a situation, right? Something is happening the way we want it, we are happy. Something is not happening the way we want it, we are sad. Now this is easier said than done. And he says that the more you practice this state of consciousness, the more you will automatically purify your heart. Because every time you catch your mind getting caught in some kind of negativity, you immediately bring it back to that state of unconditional happiness. No matter what happens in your life, no matter what you're going through in your life, you choose to be happy. He says, until we come up with a firm conviction that no matter what happens in my life, I choose to be happy, nothing will happen. There's a beautiful example I would like to share. Now, suppose you're a person who has been wandering in a desert without food for a very long period of time, and suddenly you pass by a particular home and you knock on that home, and that person provides you a meal of food, right? He says, oh poor thing, you probably have been starving for such a long time. Then preferences don't matter. The number one reason why we block happiness, which is a natural state of a being, is because we have a set of preferences. But this person who was starving for food for a very long period of time, now looking at the person who gives him any kind of food, he's not going to say that I don't like this food, I would probably prefer that food, right? He won't come up with his checklist of what are his favorites. He will essentially just hoard anything which he can get which is edible, because he's that hungry. We need to ask ourselves, do we want to be happy or not? It's essentially a choice which needs to be taken with an absolute conviction. Until we are absolutely convinced from within that no matter what happens in my life, I choose to be happy. Now, this conviction is so powerful, and it's not that once we take this conviction, it's going to be so easy that we are always going to be happy. We are going to fail miserably. And every time you fail and you get up, you fail and you get up, each time you're becoming better at it. Because essentially, you're practicing a mental habit. And men are creatures of habit. Mankind is a creature of habit. And most of us unconsciously have practiced being a miserable personality. We have unconsciously practiced how miserable is a natural state of being. We are always being sold a narrative by society that if this thing happens in my life, I should be happy. Otherwise, I shouldn't be happy. I'm not qualified to experience this emotion called happiness. The author gives a beautiful example, and he says that let's say God comes in our land, right, to interact with fellow human beings. And he interacts with a couple of human beings, and one of the human being, the God asks, how are you feeling today? And this person says that I'm feeling horrible. Everything is a chaos in my life. The trees, look at the tree is bent in so many awful, miserable ways. The sky looks so filthy. Look at the animals, they are always creating a mess. There's so much of chaos. Now this God personality talks to another person, and this another person is in absolute awe of creation. He appreciates the beauty of nature. He appreciates the good in his life and also pays gratitude to all the not so good aspects in his life. And he tells God that he's so blessed to be born in this planet. Who do you think God will like more? The person who was a complaint box, or the person who chose to see the good in the bad situations which life had given? Obviously, the latter. And one beautiful aspect and understanding here to garner and relish is this, that once you start operating with this mindset, you will realize that now I can experience true freedom. Because most of us don't understand what true freedom is. We are slaves to the outside situations and happenings. If things happen the way I want them to happen, I'll be happy. And if they don't happen the way we want them to happen, we are unhappy. This is the most miserable way to function. It is reason enough that our happiness depends upon our state of being. Let's not make ourselves an ardent slave of the behavior of other people around us. If we make our happiness unconditional, that is the highest spiritual path. And the author said in the book that once you start practicing this, you will naturally notice the purification of your heart, because you will not consume yourself in thinking negative about any person. Now, most of us think that thinking positive about us and thinking ill about the other person is not going to affect me. But let's understand this. When you are thinking bad about someone, you are essentially harboring that negativity, that resentment in your consciousness, and your consciousness is going to feel that effects in your own being. Now, whether he is affected or not, that's immaterial, but you yourself are affected. Your happiness is impeded for those minutes when you indulged yourself in those recent thoughts of negativity and resentment. And now, once you have understood this paradigm, this sort of a concept of what it means to be unconditionally happy, as I mentioned, one needs to make a firm choice. One needs to desire to be happy. And when it comes from a firm place of conviction that I choose to be happy no matter what, this becomes a spiritual discipline in itself. Because every time your mind goes up in all the garbage and all the negativity, You gently bring it back to its main focus of being in a state of unconditional happiness. You let go of the things which don't serve you. You have the courage and the conviction to let go of the things which don't serve you because you know what you want in your life. You choose happiness no matter what. Now, let's talk about the practical ways through which we can unconditionally feel or experience a perpetual state of happiness. The number one quality we all need to practice and harbor is the quality of appreciation. Are we appreciative of our own self? Probably most of us appreciate our own self, right? That we are always appreciating ourselves. Few of us don't. People who don't should start appreciating ourselves. Self love is an absolute requirement, it's not a luxury, it's an absolute requirement for our overall well being. Appreciate the goodness in you, appreciate the goodness in others as well. If you are someone who has the habit of putting others down, if you are someone who has the habit of putting others down and sort of insulting everything which they do, even if it's a positive thing, right? You always want to criticize them or you want to pull them down, quoting some other aspect of your life, then you are going to be a victim of perpetual depression. So, harboring this quality of appreciation is essential. All our mental habits are like muscles, and the more we practice it, the more stronger they become. And when life challenges us, these muscles come to our rescue. And one thing you'll realize, one practical aspect, when life is good, right, that is the time we need to train these mental habits more, because that time it's easier. When life becomes chaotic, it becomes really difficult to be appreciative, to be grateful. But if you are someone who has practiced this mental habits of appreciation and gratitude, when things were good in your life, you will find it easier to maintain the state of gratitude and appreciation when things turn chaotic in your life. Now, appreciation is a number one quality which we need to practice in our day-to-day life. Appreciate yourself and also appreciate the world in general. Appreciate anything of significance. And coming to the point number 2, right? It's about being grateful for everything which you have been blessed in life. Now, let me tell you a fun thing, right? Probably you haven't thought about this aspect. The plate of food which we consume on a day-to-day basis, at least 15 people have put in work inside that plate of food. Right from the farmer who sowed the seeds of grains which we sort of consume on a day-to-day basis, 15 people have worked to put that plate in front of you so that you can serve your hunger pangs. But are we grateful for that? Now, this might seem like a philosophy, right? This might seem like moral science, but this is not moral science. We are so used to taking things for granted. It's so easy to, okay, so what? I'm just consuming food. There are countless people in this planet who don't get a square plate of meal on a day-to-day basis. I would like to talk about a real life incident which happened in the life of Srila Prabhupada, the founder Acharya of ISKCON. This was International Society of Krishna Consciousness. So in Mayapur, in India, Prabhupada was sort of engaging in his preaching activities, and he witnesses a certain scene which moves him from within. Now what happened was, there was a particular place, a restaurant, wherein they had kept a trash sort of a container to put all the trash, right? The people of the restaurant, when they consume their food, all their plates were trashed there. He noticed something, that there were few kids who used to go inside the trash can and take out that plate, and whatever leftovers were there from the plate which people had put in the trash can, they used to lick those leftover food. And one of the incident, he also says that one of the kid who was starved of hunger, he is fighting with a dog for a loaf of bread. This incident moved Srila Prabhupada deeply, and that led for him to create this phenomenal moment, this phenomenal thought of the food for life, which we all know as Akshay Patra in today's times. Now, why did I bring up this example? Oftentimes we take things for granted, right? We don't understand the value of that particular aspect until we completely lose it. Now, this is an example of a food which we all can relate to. But this we also do with people. We don't understand the value a person was bringing in our life, both in terms of knowledge, education, inspiration, vision for the future. But because of our limited intellect, we don't understand what the value of the other person is. For us, sensory gratification, immediate enjoyments, that is the number one priority. We don't see the long-term picture. Now, gratitude is not some philosophical virtue. There is a beautiful quote which says, if you are not grateful, probably you are the greatest fool. Because let's stop taking life for granted, and the more you are grateful, the more you can naturally feel happy. The more you practice this art of gratitude, the more you become a master in this art of gratitude. Now let's come back to the third aspect. Now the third thing is something to do with the mathematical laws of nature, right? 2 plus 2 is equal to 4 or 2 minus 2 is equal to 0 is valid in the world of mathematics, but it's not valid in the world of human emotions and sentiments. Now what do I mean by that? Let me elaborate. Suppose you give something to someone from a loving disposition. Suppose you care for someone, or suppose you give random acts of kindness to someone. That essentially is not depriving you of something. Most of the times, people pull themselves back from doing anything to people because they feel that if I do something for people or something for people, I will be deprived of that. Most of us don't want to share our knowledge because we feel that if I share my knowledge, the other person might benefit from me and he will move ahead of me. We are so insecure individuals. But let's remember the law of mathematics, 2 minus 2 is equal to 0 doesn't apply here. The more you spread your virtues, the more it's going to expand in your own consciousness and in your own awareness. Hence, let's stop applying the laws of the physical world in the metaphysical, in the non-physical world. That's not how it works. The metaphysical world and the non-physical world is a completely different ball game. And the more we give, the more we become deserving of those virtues which we were given. We all are natural desirers, but we essentially need to become deserving before we desire. Hence, always stop holding yourself from appreciating someone. Don't think that something is going to reduce in yourself. Don't hold the knowledge which you have. Freely give your knowledge. Let people benefit from you. Let them go ahead of you. The fact that you became an instrument for someone else's development, isn't it an achievement in itself? The very reason we sort of stop ourselves from giving something is because of this low class thinking, is because of this low level of consciousness. I hope this particular narrative which I gave sort of tuned your perspective on how to look at the laws of mathematics. Understand this, the laws of mathematics have their place in the physical world. It doesn't work that way in the world of emotions and sentiments, in the world of consciousness in general. Now coming to the fourth dimension. The fourth dimension of what could sort of give us a feeling of perpetual, eternal happiness is to understand the model of happiness. I spoke about this in one of my earlier videos, but I want to reiterate this concept. So this is about the ladder of happiness, wherein each rung of the ladder has a particular meaning of happiness. Now at the lowest rung of the ladder is the happiness which we derive from senses, right? What are the senses we have? The happiness which we derive from sensory gratification. If you eat your favorite meal, if you go out on your favorite place, right? So these are the happiness which we can feel from the sensory disposition, right? From the sensory gratification aspect. From the sensory faculties, we can experience this happiness. But there are more evolved layers of happiness which are much beyond the senses. The next level is called the level where you are completely engrossed, the level of happiness which can be described by this term called flow, the psychological state of optimal performance called flow. When you are deeply engrossed in your activity, you naturally become a house of happiness. Now, this happiness comes from intellectual stimulation. When you are deeply engrossed in a mathematical problem, or you're deeply engrossed in a very challenging chess game. Now, this is the second level of happiness. The third level of happiness is the joy of service. There's an incident which comes in the autobiography of Mahatma Gandhi. And Mahatma Gandhi says that one fine day, I gave something to a poor kid, right? I gave something to satisfy his hunger. I fed him with food. And the experience and the face of the particular kid when he was full, right? When he had that meal and he was full, the amount of satisfaction and joy in his face, that completely satisfied my soul. And that day I understood the true source of joy and everlasting happiness is in the joy of giving. It is said that the joy of service is a much evolved state of happiness, a state of happiness which has the potential to keep you in an eternal state of bliss. This is the reason why all spiritual schools of thought talked about the immense importance of service. A service which does not have an expectation, a service which comes from a place of unconditional heart. Now, even higher than that is the place, is the aspect, is the source of happiness which comes from spiritual practices of meditation, of relentlessly harboring your consciousness in pure sattvic thoughts or thoughtlessness. Now, this is a different ball game altogether. All the accomplished yogis of our tradition continuously be in this state and they experience the highest level of happiness, a happiness which you and me cannot even comprehend at this point of time. But we probably have had glimpses of it. Have you ever noticed that when you are completely surrounded by nature, you have these moments of thoughtlessness, when you are absolutely not consumed in any thinking process and you are captivated and it almost feels like you are being consumed by nature. This is that state of ecstasy which we experience for a very short period of time. The yogis experience it 24/7. Now, this is a very high level of happiness which most of us probably don't even endeavor, but I brought about this aspect so that we can think about the level of happiness. The problem comes when most of us, the number one reason for unhappiness is that when we sort of isolate or confine our understanding of happiness to only the sensory level of happiness. The more we think, the more we hoard things, the more we gratify our senses, the more we are going to be happy. But no, that's not going to work. We need to move to the higher levels of happiness, the more evolved states of happiness. So I hope this particular video gave you a lot of length and breadth to understand what being unconditionally happy truly meant. Thank you so much for your time on my video. I am sincerely grateful for your time on my video, and please don't forget to share this video with a couple of your friends, because we all are chasing happiness. And if you realize this part, that you are naturally, you need not qualify to be happy. You can be happy and chase those things, whatever your goals and dreams are. Thank you so much. And if you are enjoying the genre of content I am sharing, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Also share your valid comments and feedback so that I know how I am doing and how I can improve on with my content which I am propagating. Thank you so much, and I'll meet you in the next video. Bye.